NATO keeping its response to a potential Russian chemical attack deliberately tactically ambiguous, but the alliance has said it will increase protection for Ukraine against chemical, biological and nuclear threats. So what would that involve? Hamish de Bretton-Gordon is a former commander of UK and NATO chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear defence forces and the author of How to Survive a Chemical or Biological Attack. He's currently advising the Ukrainian government and training Ukrainian citizens to protect themselves from chemical attacks and joins us now. Good evening.
Good evening.
First of all, I wonder what you think a response from NATO might be.
Well, I think your previous speaker was very candid because from where I see it, there are two possible responses. The Russians could either use some of their deadly chemical weapons like Novichok. I'm speaking to you from Salisbury, where Putin ordered a chemical weapons attack here. And Novichok is a deadly chemical warfare agent that could potentially kill tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people. But equally, I've also seen the Russians up close in Syria over the last 6 years, where they've supported the Assad regime, who've used what we call toxic industrial chemicals like chlorine, ammonia, and cyanide. And with all the false flag operations that the Russians have been suggesting, I'm sort of expecting that if the Russians do use chemical weapons, it's more likely to be the latter, something like chlorine, which is there to terrify civilians. And that's what the Russians want to do, terrify civilians in order that they surrender. And I think if the Russians use a toxic industrial chemical like chlorine, the response will be slightly different if they use one of their chemical warfare agents, which could kill many thousands of people. And I think that's why NATO have been slightly candid in what they've said today.
So what about preparing the Ukrainian public, protecting them? What can be done? What are you doing?
Well, I think an awful lot can be done because any threat that you don't expect is always far greater. And what we found in Syria, if we train civilians how to react to chemical attacks, then we could mitigate their losses. How you react to a chemical attack is very different to how you react to a conventional bombardment, for instance. What we try and educate the civilians is don't dive underground if there's a chemical attack, because the chemicals, because they're generally heavier than air, seep underground and they kill people underground or force them above ground where they can be captured or shot. So it's slightly counterintuitive. So we're saying if there's a chemical attack, get to high ground, know where the wind is, because these chemicals blow quite readily away on the wind. Hold your breath for 30 seconds and run across the wind. And thirdly, most importantly, decontaminate yourself, because if you get these chemicals off you in 30 seconds or a minute, they're not going to affect you. So there are three very simple things they can do so that they can survive.
Yeah, and briefly, we don't have too much time, unfortunately, but what kind of equipment can be sent or should be sent?
Well, I think NATO are probably going to send a lot of personal protective equipment, ostensibly respirators, also suits to keep the chemicals off, decontamination facilities, be it chemicals or liquid that they can decontaminate themselves, and also detection equipment so they can work out exactly what they're being attacked with.
And just briefly then, in terms of readiness for NATO countries like Latvia, those around the edges, what could they do?
Well, I expect they're doing a lot of training at the moment so that they know how to react. During the Cold War, we were all very proficient at reacting to chemical, biological and nuclear attack. We've sort of, paid lip service to it since then, but with the Russian threats over the last few weeks, I expect people are doing a lot of training, making sure their equipment's up to date and making sure that all their soldiers have respirators, protective equipment, and where possible, also training and equipping civilians, because it's not just those civilians in Ukraine who might be affected by these attacks, but also, of course, those surrounding countries.
Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, thanks very much.